Oh, how do one take over after such a beginning of this conference? It's perhaps only one person that can do it, and it's our next speaker, the one and only Tiina Rosenberg, a professor in gender studies and theater uh, studies, and so much more. You can read more about her in the bio, and we are so happy that you're here today and will be doing the opening address. Welcome, Tiina.
Um, good morning, everyone. And how can one take off from this wonderful morning music? We should have perhaps had a sing along. Just a few minutes. How do I see my PowerPoint here, but I don't know how to get. Maybe David can be helpful here. But in the meanwhile, dear friends, I'm incredibly honored to be here today, delivering this opening address to all of you, and especially because we are in Gothenburg. There are at least 3 different reasons for Gothenburg. Why Gothenburg? Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was easy. So embarrassing. Why Gothenburg? First of all, to meet you all here, new and familiar faces, wonderful, but also for a historical reason, archival reason, was that some 30 years ago, there was the second seminar, or was it named conference, organized at the time by Margareta Lindholm, who is present here today, Anne Nilsson, and Eva Borgström. It was called the Lesbian and Gay Studies Conference. Was it called conference or a seminar? Conference. Yes, conference at the time. And you were expecting, Margareta, some 25 participants. 120 people showed up. And that was a huge success in those days. And if I compare now, having become an archive myself, so looking at people today doing queer studies, doing gender studies, and all kinds of studies. So that was a huge effort for Gothenburg, having the activist tradition, but also the academic tradition for what was to become. But there is also something. I'm very grateful for the queer community in Gothenburg, because you have always you stood by me when times were rough. Thank you. We have several of you here, Olaf over there, and that's also part of the political and historical tradition that people actually act in solidarity in those days. That was 20 years ago, so we don't go back there. Those of you who were there know what I'm talking about. Today, I just want to do a few. I have a few points, and the first point is about archives. When we are talking about archives, so I'm not getting too historical, but all societies, I think, the most of the societies that had some form of writing culture have had archives. So that's not an invention of ourselves, and that you already knew. But I mean, that is something I wanted to point out. And now comes the only negative point, the only critical point I am going to make today. Maybe you can't read this so well, but maybe the picture, the image. And it is actually from Unsplash, because he told me not to take anything from the internet, just like that. Why some people are critical about the archival practice or archives is that it has to do with the late 18th century German control culture. And it has to do with the office and the typewriter, and it also has to do with the index cards. Do you remember those? Some of you actually do. I've been working in an archive myself. Oh, there we have. Yeah, all right. That's very good. But the control culture has to do with so-called low and high trust societies. If you have lived in a high trust society, then people have the tendency, not everyone, to actually trust the democratic institutions. If you come from a different background, question. Those of us who do queer archival or historical studies need those archives, but there is also a reason why it has been so very difficult to uh, to to kind of get to that archival practice, because people were not willing to donate their material and even give interviews. This is now my first point. This is when I discovered that the archive was something else than the dusty sort of storage space. I think that if I say the word archive to someone who doesn't know the theoretical and political development of the archive, so they think of something that is dark in the basement. Oh, well, now it's getting very close to the queer culture, but dusty. Dusty, and maybe the queer culture is not dusty, but rather sweaty in those places. But this moment for me was when our dear colleague Jack Halberstam came to Lund. I was a professor at the time. I think Tuula Juvonen, who is always here, also here present today, was actually at the seminar, because you had the egg clock. Do you remember that? Tuula had the egg clock so that nobody would be overexcited. So we all had 5 minutes, and then the bell was ringing. Anyway, the thing with this seminar was that I understood something I had never understood, and that was kind of new to all of us, was how Jack had written this in a queer time and place, reflected on the archive, namely that the archive is a mindset as well. So we learned to say, this is not in my archive. And if you say, this is not in my archive, that means that I don't know that music, or I don't know, I haven't read these books, or I haven't seen these films. It's not only to be in a concrete storage, it's also, it could be artistic, intellectual, political, whatever tradition. So this was something that we were doing an exercise, saying to each other, well, I don't have this in my archive. And that, I think, was the moment for me, if we are talking about milestones or turning points in historical research, when I understood that the archive was something else. Maybe you already knew that at the time, but for some 20 years ago, so I hadn't reflected so much about it. Nor you don't need to necessarily to read all these things. You just, if you remember the headline, that the archive is also the mindset. It's also a national mindset. It's a colonial mindset. It is a heteronormative mindset, etc., etc. Because those minds do actually work in archives, and those minds do actually make these collections come alive. So it's not just the hand and the index card or whatever it could be. This goes in many different directions. So we are talking today about archivism, that is a combination of the archive and activism. So this is not coming from a not very revolutionary, maybe more reformist perspective. It is that to work in an archive is a political obligation, one would say, because in that sense, there needs to be a certain sense of activism in order to understand what to preserve and how to collect. When Jack was giving that seminar back in the day, for 20 years ago, we had so little information, and my colleague, my Finnish colleague, sociologist Kati Mustola, back in the day, tried already in the 80s to interview elderly queer people who absolutely refused. They were kind of keeping their closets very closed. And all of a sudden today, we are in a situation where the digital information, social media, etc. Now we have too much information. At those days, it was really difficult to find something, had too little evidence, ideas, maybe, yes. Today, it's too much. So today, it's a kind of the other way, where you need to make a selection and think about those things that really need to be preserved in different ways. And that is something I guess that I worked in an archive for many years ago with theatre collection at the Drottningholm Theatre Museum that doesn't even exist anymore. Now it's the Music and Theatre Library. And the most of the collections in different ways, and also queer collections, are from the beginning private collections. So this is going to the basements, going to the attics, trying to get into those boxes, don't throw anything, keep all the sheets, keep all the manifestos, keep all the pictures, etc., etc. All the movies. Yes, and I can see you are shaking your head. Why didn't you keep everything? And most of us, it hasn't been possible. We've been living in small spaces and with no storage possibilities, etc., etc. But it's a good reminder that the part of the activist or the political, queer, but also artistic heritage comes actually from individual collections for different ways. And then they kind of start to grow if there are people around who know and understand, who has the archive also as an intellectual and academic or political mindset. So these things go together. And the thing that we actually have seen, that was very nice, Pia, because I didn't know about the surprise. Well, otherwise it wouldn't have been surprised, but it is to sing in the morning, to sing or dance in the morning is the best way to start a morning. But this is the point, actually, one of the points I want to make. Then I have one more, and Pia, I'm going to keep to time, so don't worry. Is performing the archive. Since my empirical material, my research field is the performing arts, and that it's a very broad notion, and I'm not going to give you a lecture on that, on the performing arts. It is just that from there is a different notion of the archive, not something dead, but that the archive is an artistic medium in itself. You can do reenactments. You can, so to say, perform. It's not only that you have a choreography, and the performances are just going away. We don't actually, when we have been to the theater, dance, opera, stand-up, whatever, or tonight to the variety show, we don't have that. We can't keep it that in our hands. But there might be something, but it's not only the performing arts. There are reenactments of different forms of performances. War situation, that might not be my favorite, I just mention it. You can reenact history in performative ways. But the main point is here not what you are actually, so to say, performing from your archive. The main idea is that if you want to theoretically and politically kind of counteract those people who say the archive is the dead space or the space for control, etc., etc., then you can think about that the archive is also the other way around, a living space, a space where the mindset, the practices, the everyday life comes together with history, general history, the arts, whatever. And then the archive turns into something that is lived experience, but it's also up to date. It's something that we can do today. And this we can, I just took one of, there are several books, but there is also Simon Osthoff who has written about that, an art historian, and the performative way of thinking about archives as performances, as something livable and something very much alive was actually one of the main points I wanted to do here. And today I wanted to end with two things. And this is now the challenges that we have. When I said that in those, back in the days when people were doing, today we do interviews as well, scholars use different sort of methodologies, that there was so little information or rather ideas about queerness in the past, and that there is too much information today, but there also a lot of information is fragile. So the digital, what happens if you don't have electricity? We have already seen the Ukrainian situation, or the situation in the Middle East, etc., where you don't have all of a sudden electricity in other war spaces. What happens with the cultural heritage, where we actually are a part of that, also our history or the queer history, etc. So this is one of those challenges. Where do you have your material? If it's digitalized in some sort of cloud, I'm not an IT sort of person, but someone could explain this more and better. In boxes, maybe those index cards that we're still having with us, etc., etc. So this is one of those challenges that we need to think about. And this is actually why we are here today, is that we are the ones, that might be a little bit, over the top to say that, but I think that we are on a very important mission here. This is now to guarantee the diversity of the historical material that is collected. I know that I am stating here the obvious, so that I'm already telling you something that you already know. But I think also that coming together today, it is important to understand, especially early in the morning, that the work we are doing actually matters, that it is important. And everyone who works in a straight archive, most of them they are not called straight archives. So they don't say hello, morning, good morning to your fellow co-workers, and I'm here. Okay, you're straight and you don't understand what you're collecting, but anyway, because there is the moment where decisions are made. Not everything can be collected. A lot of things disappear from the world, but there is always this coming in influx of material where decisions are made, what is going to be served and what is not going to be served. So this is interesting. And also the access. Today, a lot of stuff is accessible, but it needs to be also accessible in those ways that you can have the access into the material also, typing in lesbian, gay, queer, trans, whatever people are looking for, etc. So this is why we are here today together, and why we are basically this work. And my last point is before the discussion is, it says gratis, which means for free. This is my last point, is that you never know what becomes an archive. You might think that you find this sort of garbage bag somewhere that says that please take the things that are inside of the box. You're passing by on the street, maybe free books, or that might be something, somebody wants to share something. You don't know, this might be interesting material for something. Some of you collect theater programs, some of you collect something else. As activists, you should have everything, all the flyers, the t-shirts, the whatever material, the slogans, the manifestos, etc. We have an example over there on the wall right now of an archive, etc. So when you're walking around in a city, if you are a walking person, I hope you are, or that you can walk, not everyone can, but if you have that capacity and you walk around, so think about that. Is the city in my archive? Of course, being in Gothenburg, and I obviously already started with that it is in my archive in a very dear kind of way. But when you pass these empty boxes, on almost empty boxes, you never know if there would be something important that would start an archive, because an archive doesn't necessarily need to have a name yet. You can name it, you can label it, but you can also start an archive of your own. And I think that most of you already have private archives, although you might not be considering them as one. So this is basically what I wanted to say here today. In summary, is that, all right, I understand, I get it, that there is some suspicion about archives as a form of state control. Why is information gathered? Because we have terrible examples of that in history. So I understand that. The second point was, for me, as a milestone to understand, also a mindset that we all have our archives, what we have read, and seen, etc. When I was young, I had long lists, and I was very happy to read that. So did Simone de Beauvoir, because maybe not the best example, but she also had long lists. That was sort of in German you say Bildungsliste, also, so you know what to read in order to get there. And that becomes not only became my archive, but also your own archive. That's the one thing about the mindset. Then performing the archive, that it's terribly important to understand that the archive is a medium, artistic medium, political medium, historical medium in itself. And then the challenge is, of course, preserving the material and making those important choices. So don't ignore the empty boxes on your way through Gothenburg. Maybe this would be the week or the day to start your private archive. So once more, a dear thank you for having me here today. It is, as I already said, a great honor to see you all here, and have a great conference today. I'm sorry to hear it's the last one of the kind, but I think that there will be more to come. There are always more, obvious, because we who are the old, who are the archive houses, so we are still standing. Hopefully a couple of more years.
Could we start like questions and answer, and then it should. Do I have to talk like that? Okay. We were thinking that we have some questions and answers from the different tables, and this can develop into some kind of discussions, perhaps, eventually. So, which table want to pose, for instance, questions or a reflection or a comment to Tiina? I will run around, or Sandra will run around. Okay. Yes. Notes to them. Hi. In our table, we were discussing the question whether we have our personal archives, and if so, what might they be, and what are we doing with them? And it turned out that some people sort of hoard everything that they ever have gotten their hands on, and others are like throwing things away without any further thought. And some people have they like memory boxes but don't exactly know where they are. And then some people already have donated materials to archives and are contemplating about doing so. So what about you, Tiina? What about your personal archives, and what are your plans for them?
Some of if you have been moving around a bit, so I can't have everything with me, but I have I have like diaries, and I have letters, diaries, images. I have books. Nobody cares about books anymore. You know, you can donate books, but they already have them, etc. So basically, you can put books in that kind of boxes on the street, and then people can go collect. Some things that have been too painful, actually. I thought that I can't have them with me, because there is something about the feeling about the attic or the basement, that you have a sort of troll, the Scandinavian troll, that you have a kind of ghost or something that is taking away your energy in a way that you can't have it, that you just need to, might be historically interesting, but you just need to get rid of it for different reasons. So I think that in terms of personal purification, one could say so, in order to go on with life, sometimes you can't have everything with you. So there is selection. So I did a Marie Kondo. Many of you, but I'm the cleaning type. I do clean everywhere. I may have always made all my colleagues nervous because I have always been cleaning in all workplaces and everywhere where we have been. So I was asking my book collection, for instance, that do I really love you? I mean, it's sentimental and it's pathetic, but that is this book. So I made a collection so that I have my favorite books when I was young, when I was a kid, and when I was young, and then the different periods of my life. So there is the feminist and queer library, theater, the books I need for work, which is basically those things, and then literature, my German literature from those days when I was in Germanics and everything. So I've been asking myself, and I've been talking to my archive, so to say, and the archive was not talking back in an activist way, but in a very sort of, we were engaged in a dialogue, and it was very helpful. So I think it's important to look at that one's archive, and there are so many things we have forgotten. Actually, reading old letters, for instance, is also one of a kind of experience. Oh, not Pia. Now that you see, this is why we have Pia.
Memory lane. I've seen Tiina's diaries, and they are full of tickets and things, and they are really lovely to look at. But more questions from another table, perhaps, or reflections or comments? Okay. Not so long answers, thank you.
Oh, boy. Sorry.
Yeah, one thing that we were talking about, or we just had the chance to just raise it, is kinky and sexy stuff in archives, and or archiving this as it's quite challenging because often in kinky spaces you can't take photographs, for example, or people are there using nicknames, stuff like that. So we were just about to get going with talking about how we can collect our kinky history.
Yes,
it's not really a question,
yeah.
but
but then it's a very good question, and now this we could go on. So I feel like Fidel Castro here, not stopping talking, but it's a very good question, and then you need to work like with memory history, that people write down stuff. But the thing is that today we can already see that people don't want to do that kind of work publicly. If you're in an academic position, you can't do it with all these right-wing governments today. We can maybe make here some political statements. I don't know, Pia Laskar, can we say that? Can we say right-wing government? I mean, people, that is a very, very good question, and that is also at the heart of queer archives. As long as it's poetry or girls' literature and so to say, the clean space in that sense. And that might also be one of the archive. But then the sexual archive, actually sexual practices, that has always been a question, and that has always been difficult. We have a couple of colleagues who have been doing that kind of work, and it hasn't been easy to get funding, or you can get them maybe published. But it's a very good question. I would say writing down memories and doing that in a free will kind of way, but where the publish and where the storage, that it's maybe in those, there are a few museums of sexuality, of the history of sexuality, maybe there. But that's a very crucial question for queer studies, queer sexual practices.
Thank you. Comments or reflections? Don't be shy. You have something there? Yeah. No?
Yeah.
Well, maybe we should keep the timetable, Pia. You have it in the front of you.
But we have some minutes left. So a last question or reflection? No? Okay, we don't have to force anything. You can talk with each other, and we can prolong the discussion amongst each other for 5 minutes. I just want to say that it's not really the last conference. We will come back in either way somehow. And but now we would love to say thank you to Tiina and leave this little.
And if you do want to donate something to Kurab, we give you archive books as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We will say.
So they could